situation in the US if like we have had some DNC leak documents before, but we had something similar happen with Bernie Sanders in a very different way, of course, and it was like less, I think, scandalous. It was actually less covert. But within the Labor Party, there was this like avid denial of it for so long. And then this comes out and it's been like radio silence in terms of coverage.
Yeah.
Like I haven't seen a single mainstream media outlet cover this at all or
There's been
anyone
nothing.
acknowledge it. And it was kind of funny. I even saw a few people who were denying that there was anything like this going on. One person who comes to mind is was it Paul Mason or it was George Monbiot, however you say his name. He was on Twitter like denying for a long time that anything was going on in terms of like trying to sabotage Jeremy Corbyn and even playing into it. And then I saw a tweet from him like last week being like, are these files real? This is crazy.
Yeah.
And it's like, where have you been, dude? But can you maybe like elaborate a bit and give some examples of what exactly we're talking about here? Like, what's so scandalous? What did they do? Because some people might throw up their arms and say, so what? But why does this matter? Like, what exactly went down?
Well, there's just a lot of it, basically. So, I mean, a lot of it, especially the second episode, revolves around the false idea that there was a unique problem of anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, that these exaggerated and fabricated allegations of anti-Semitism against Jeremy Corbyn and his supporters were used to really kind of manufacture a scandal for Jeremy Corbyn, which was incredibly damaging, especially on the movement behind him. It was really kind of a divisive thing, and it took out some of his most powerful supporters. But there's also other examples in the documentary of how there was one example of how another form of identity politics was used to attack Jeremy Corbyn's supporters. So there's an example of a local Labour Party, what's called a constituency Labour Party in Liverpool, a famously left-wing city in the north of England, which so the local Labour Party supporters, there was back in 2016, their local MP at one point wanted to challenge Jeremy Corbyn for the leadership because she was from the right of the party. Part of it's really kind of neoliberal establishment, pro-war establishment, pro-Israel establishment. And she was one of a few challengers to Jeremy Corbyn. And bear in mind, this was less than a year that he'd been elected as leader of the Labour Party. He hadn't even been given a chance to kind of set out his programme. And he'd been undermined at every step. And this MP, Angela Eagle was her name, she kind of embarked on this project to run against him. There was this whole series of what was called a chicken coup, attempts to undermine Jeremy Corbyn. It was called a chicken coup because they were saying they wanted to overthrow him, but then they were refusing to put up a candidate because they knew they had nobody on the right wing of the Labour Party who would be popular with members. So the grassroots base called them chickens. So it was called the chicken coup. But what happened with Angela Eagle was that her own local Labour Party supporters didn't support her. So in her local constituency, the Labour Party grassroots were all in favour of Jeremy Corbyn. And so because of that, what seems to have happened is, and is shown in the documentary, was that there was a story invented in the press, and it got quite a lot of headlines in the press, that Angela Eagle's constituency Labour Party had abused her in homophobic terms. That they'd I think the claim was that they'd called her a dyke or something like that. This sort of homophobic language. It's completely untrue. And what Al Jazeera did very convincingly was they interviewed on camera as many of the members as possible they could, and no one had heard this happening, and they it didn't happen, essentially, and there was no evidence that it had ever happened. It was just something that was basically passed around. Oh, someone close to Angela Eagle says this happened, kind of thing. And yet it was whipped up at the time. So in that sense, there was some of the revelation. There was parts of this series which weren't new. Like, I mean, we all kind of all of us on the kind of grassroots left at the time and in the alternative media, like myself, knew this at the time, that this was nonsense. But the series is quite good in kind of laying out the story in what happened. So that's just one example, but there's a whole bunch of new specifics that it gets into, that we do learn things. We do learn new things from the documents, and one of the things I found most fascinating was you showed my article there, the first one about new bombshell film exposes Israel lobby role in the UK Labour Party. What they learned from the documents was the involvement of an Israel lobbyist called Luke Ackhurst, who's now on the Labour Party's ruling National Executive Committee. And he was involved in trying to help a right-wing activist stay in the party, despite the fact that he'd been guilty. His name was Luke Stanger. And he'd been guilty of harassing left-wing Labour Party activists, kind of stalking them almost, allegedly outside an activist's child's school even, and online, calling his employer, saying you've got an anti-Semite working for you, trying to get him fired, and all this kind of horrific stuff. And as a result, the left-wing activist, his name was Damien McCarthy, I mean, he's personally convinced that his stepfather died soon after, and he's personally convinced that this sort of harassment by the right-wing forces that were taking place played a part in his death. Like, basically, the stress of it caused him to die, basically. So, or at least in part. So the involvement of this now NEC member, Luke Ackhurst, is significant from my perspective because, for more than a decade, he's been leading an organization called We Believe in Israel, which, and this is what he does for his job. He's not just some activist. He's you could call him a professional Israel lobbyist. This organization, We Believe in Israel, they run things like their most recent notable campaign was they ran a campaign calling for Spotify to delete the music of Loki, the British Iraqi rapper, pro-Palestinian rapper, just to have his music deleted altogether. They do things like that. And so this is the Labour Party's internal Israel lobby. And what the Labour file leaks show, that he had actually written a letter in defense of Luke Stanger, this abusive right-wing local activist in Brighton. And Luke Stanger's, campaign of harassment against left-wingers had led to him being suspended. He was so extreme. For once, someone from the right was suspended. Very rarely happens, but it happened in his case. And he wrote a letter in his own defense to the Labour Party. And what Al Jazeera showed was that the metadata on that letter, which they obtained, revealed that it was actually written by the other Luke, by Luke Ackhurst, the Israel lobbyist. And also Stanger's lawyer, apparently pro bono lawyer, was Mishkon de Reya. Mishkon de Reya is essentially is super expensive law firm based in London, which was Princess Diana's divorce lawyer. So, this guy apparently he's unemployed most of the time, Stanger. He's only worked in low-paid jobs, and he's a Labour Party activist in his spare time. Clearly, he couldn't afford this lawyer. So the lawyer was acting in a pro bono fashion. Well, who else does this lawyer work for? Israel. Mishkon de Reya is the State of Israel's preferred lawyer in London. They've done things like working for Ariel Sharon in the past. They've done things like there's been several high-profile so-called lawfare suits that Mishkon de Reya has carried out on behalf of the Israel lobby in Britain against organizations that have even discussed the boycott of Israel. So a decade ago, there was a really high-profile lawsuit against the UCU, the University and College Union, which is essentially, university staff, lecturers, and teachers. It's their trade union. There was a discussion at one point of the concept of the academic boycott of Israel. didn't go very far because there was this massive lawsuit against them in which Mishkon Dereya played a large part. So, you can see kind of the ties at play here. And I think the series did a fairly good job of bringing out a lot of this.